Hello, I'm Jonathan Mason.
And I'm Sonia Madison, and welcome to Law Unfiltered, where we talk about current issues and, as Jonathan likes to say, give juicy legal tidbits to address them with you. So we talked about Prince a couple of weeks ago, and recently we found out that he didn't have an estate or didn't have a will, and now all of a sudden a lot of states and a lot of people are thinking about coming up with statutes in the event that someone like a Prince passes away and doesn't have any type of documentation to show who gets ownership of all his creative works. And Minnesota has recently done it, which is where Prince used to live before his death. But tell us a little bit about this statute.
Okay,
or this proposal, I should
right.
say.
Well, a couple of things you said there that we have to distinguish between where his creative works go as opposed to this statute, which is called the Prince Act. But that act isn't really geared toward his music. It's geared toward use of his likeness, his name, his voice, his likeness, that sort of thing. Now, a lot of states, and we could look up a list, but a lot of states have statutes in place already, like notably California. They have what are called right of publicity statutes. So the right of publicity is a commercial right of a celebrity to exploit their name, likeness, image. Some statutes say voice. Some include other identifying information about the celebrity, or some indicator that you're invoking that celebrity. It doesn't have to be their actual person. It doesn't have to be a photo. But Minnesota had a common law recognition of the right of publicity, but there's nothing statutory, and that common law right didn't extend post-mortem. So here we have, celebrity like of the stature of Prince in a state where there was no recognition of a right of publicity. And so, after death anyway. And so basically what you could have been left with if there was no statute is a situation where people could make Prince t-shirts and sell them. They could put Prince's image on guitars and products like that because there was no recognition of right of publicity after death. Now, I mentioned California, but by contrast, for example, New York is a place where there's no right of publicity after death. And so what that boils down to then is the place where you are domiciled at the time you die, that law of that state controls, because there's no federal right of publicity. So it's a really, really, really important issue. And so Minnesota now is trying to
And before
deal
you
with
go
that
forward, because
situation.
you mentioned a lot of legal terms that I don't know if our viewers are going to understand. So when you
Sure.
talk about common law, what does that mean?
Yeah, so basically there are two types of law that can be applicable in a state. One, common law deals with court decisions, so you will have a court case that establishes a right or, establishes, we hear of cases like Roe v. Wade, and there's law that comes out of those cases that you have to follow, and that's called common law, as opposed to, every state and the federal government has a legislature, and that legislature creates laws, usually called statutes, or that are on the books that also have to be followed in that state. So your law can develop from common law, which is when a court decides a case, or it could develop from statutory law, is when that state legislature, House of Representatives, Senate, or whatever you have in your particular state, writes a bill, they vote on it, governor signs it, and then it becomes law.
So in this particular instance, even if Prince had a will, because there was no case or older case or, like you said, common law, and there's no statute where he was domiciled, which was Minnesota where he lived,
Right.
his estate couldn't sue someone for using his likeness to make money.
That's what I would say, yes. I would
Okay.
agree with that statement, but again, if they use his likeness or name in connection with one of his creative works that were covered by copyright, because the term for copyright lasts beyond death. So copyright lasts 70 years after the death of the author. So you still couldn't use his creative works, but yeah, presumably, because in a will you can't leave a right that doesn't exist. So if Minnesota didn't have that,
well, you had the right when you were alive. You just don't have the right.
it just expires
When you die.
Right.
So then let's talk about.
And one thing I want to point out real quick though, under the statute, is the statute would be retroactive for people who died prior to enactment of the statute. So it would, even though it would be enacted after Prince's death, it would still cover his estate.
So then let's talk about this bill, because it hasn't been a statute yet. So right now he still doesn't have post, right of publicity. So what is his bill saying? Is it just giving him the right under any cost, or are there exceptions, or are there limitations to an estate's ability to sue someone for using their likeness?
Yeah, all of these statutes do have certain common provisions. For example, how long does a right of publicity last after death? I mentioned 70 years in California. Some states it's 20 years. Some states it's 50 years. I recall one state is 100 years. So it
and what
varies.
is Minnesota proposing?
Minnesota, it's kind of quirky. They're proposing a minimum of 50 years. And it would only expire if there was proof that the estate was no longer using it. So presumably it could go on forever and ever, which some commentators have pointed out that's kind of unusual. Although there are some states that may have a common law scheme where it's not clear how long it lasts, so presumably it would last forever. But there are also exceptions built in for news media, sportscasts, advertisers who might, like for example, a newspaper they're printing an ad, although that's kind of funny because newspapers are a dying breed, but they might print an ad from a grocery store that has Prince in it. So they didn't know that the advertiser didn't have permission to use Prince's images. So they tried to build in shield liability from someone in that position of that newspaper. But there's always this tension between First Amendment in terms of news gathering and also in terms of creative works, between the right of publicity and the right to report news and the right to create work. So if I wanted to paint do a painting of Prince, can his estate, if this bill passes, could they stop me from painting a picture of Prince and selling it? I don't think so. I think there's a lot of case law that says, there's an inherent right and a public interest in First Amendment freedom of expression, and so we can't let celebrities stop people from creating creative works. I could have thought of a better way to say that, but now that's different from you copying someone else's work. If I took a photo of Prince and then someone comes and copies my photo and paints it, well, then I might have a claim against that person for copyright infringement of my photo, which would necessarily be a claim that Prince's estate could bring. But so there's always this tension between First Amendment and these statutes. I want to make sure our
viewers understand, when we're talking about likeness, what are we talking about? We're not talking about his music, right?
No, we're not talking about his.
We're not talking about his concerts, or are we?
Well, okay, that's a good question. And likeness, a lot of times you think of it as a photograph. It could be a drawing. But there have been recent cases, there have been a lot of cases on this, what constitutes someone's likeness. We had Michael Jordan lawsuits recently where the likeness was some sneakers with number 23 on them. They never had a picture of Michael Jordan. They never said his name, or even if they may have mentioned his name in one of the cases, but the main likeness was these sneakers, these Air Jordan sneakers with the number 23. In other cases, they've been caricatures of an artist. There was one where someone used Justin Bieber on an app, but it wasn't Justin Bieber. They called it Jousting Beaver or something like that. And it was a beaver that had hair that looked like Justin Bieber, excuse me. So there's definitely been litigation over what constitutes a likeness. The statute in Minnesota also includes voice. There have been some famous cases involving Tom Waits and Bette Midler, where, like in Bette Midler's case, Ford Motor Company reached out to her to do an ad. She didn't want to do it, so they hired one of her background singers to sing a song that she was well known for, and they told her to sound like Bette Midler. And so Bette Midler sued because she said, you know what, there's value in attaching my voice or what sounds like my voice to this ad. And she was successful in that. So,
but I'd imagine she had a copyright on that beyond just the likeness part, since they used her song.
Well, no, it's the song she sang. She didn't necessarily write the song,
okay.
So she may not have been able to stop them from using the song in the advertisement. But she said, by directing this person to sound like me, you recognize that there's value in my voice, and so you've basically misappropriated my likeness in this advertisement, and she was successful. So likeness can be construed in many ways. I mean, there was even an older case involving RJ Reynolds Tobacco Company.
Viewers too much, though.
But I'm just saying, like, people think that, it's not actually Prince, or I'm changing the hair. But, you can't try to be tricky about it and say, well, I'm not going to use his actual name. I'm just going to use, say if it was Michael Jackson, I'm going to have an ad and have a white glove, on a piano or something, a single, glove covered with rhinestones or something. Well, you know what? You never said Michael Jackson, but he was known for the glove. So you're trying to make people think that Michael Jackson is endorsing your piano or something like that. So
did Minnesota actually define it, or is that something else that's probably going to be litigated as to what?
They did define it in the statute. I mean, I could look at the exact language, but I will, for the purposes here, it did include voice.
Mm-hmm.
So you couldn't create a commercial and have someone who sounded like Prince. There's a commercial, I don't know what type of product it is, but it's like a little person that like pops out of the washer or dryer. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but that person, to me, his mannerisms remind me of Prince. And I always thought that, like, when I saw the commercials, this was before Prince passed away, and I'm like, are they trying to act like Prince in this?
Which I'd imagine is something that they would have to show. There was an intent to act like.
Right.
So, say a member of this state sees someone post a symbol of Prince's sign. What is the damage, according to the statute?
Well, you can, assuming that would be considered his likeness,
mm-hmm.
you could go after the profits that that person made from selling that product, and you can also get punitive damages. And if it goes to trial and you're successful, you can also recover attorney's fees and costs. So the penalty could be quite steep in a situation like that.
So what are you predicting? Is it going to pass, or is there a lot of animosity going on between the states?
When they introduced it, they only had a couple of weeks left in the session. I think they're going to pass something. This statute, I think, has some problems with it. It's vague in some areas, and there's so many other state statutes that have stood the test of time. It seems like they could just
model it
after some of those other statutes. But I think that I've never lived in Minnesota. I've been there, but clearly Prince was, a hero in that state. He was, a world-class celebrity and entertainer, and he didn't leave Minnesota. He stayed in Minnesota, and there's a strong recognition and love of Prince there. And so I think they're going to pass something, but it may not be in the form as it was introduced. But I think they need to. I mean, I don't think it should be a free-for-all on...
At least not the likeness, right?
Right.
Well, and I'm sure there's a reason why they call it Prince's Law, right? Just to remind you why we're actually putting
They
this
call
in
it
place.
Prince's Law. Now, that's an acronym for, I could look it up, but it stands for something to do with names can endure or something. I don't remember the exact acronym, but we can, you can look it
Well,
up.
I'm
but
sure they tried to fit
Of
words
course.
with it.
Absolutely,
Name,
right. Absolutely. I mean, clearly it was in response to Prince, and they named it Prince's Law because of, the connection with Prince.
Well, it should be seen. I think that's kind of an interesting tidbit, even though the likeness, using the name, I'd imagine is some form of likeness, but this is government. So that's
Well, and one commentator I read about it said the way the statute is written, the statute probably violates itself,
right. But
which
again,
would be a first.
sounds
Sue the state
like-
legislature. Maybe they'll sue the state legislature for using
Yeah.
Prince in the
use the old statute to sue the.
exactly.
Well, thanks for. We have to keep our viewers posted on this. And
Yeah,
see if
absolutely.
It actually passes.
Yes,
But
we
thanks
will.
for explaining that, and thank you guys for listening. Definitely comment if you have any questions, and we'll see you next time.
Bye bye.